I want to tell you a story about the first time I had an accessibility task. It was a few years ago in a different company, and I had a huge project of making our application accessible. And after a few months of work, it was a huge success. Everything was accessible, and my product manager and the customers were thrilled. That on one hand, but on the other hand, it was a complete failure. And I'll tell you why. Because if you've been in the industry for long enough, you know that products tend to change and designers tend to change. And when a new designer arrives, or a new product manager, or there's a new trend in designing, or a new direction for the product, then you need to change the colors, change the user interactions, and accessibility is the first thing to break. So after we were done in our project, the code looked something like this. I mean, it worked like this car. It drives, it can take you from place to place, but once you have a sharp enough pivot, or a new color scheme, or new interactions, or new buttons, new pop-ups, it will just break. And accessibility tends to break, and we don't tend to test it that much. So this car would stop from driving, but our inaccessible site can stay there in production until the next time we'll do a manual audit. So a few years after, in my current position, we had the same challenge. We wanted to make our application accessible in a maintainable way. So now we tackled it from a different approach. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. And hopefully it could contribute to you or to your company to make more accessible code. So the title of this talk is My Accessibility Journey, the Quest for an Accessible Component Library, or as the full name should be, the Quest for a Component Library that lets refactors and redesigned and is easily maintainable and testable. But before that, let me introduce myself. So my name is Asaf Shochet. I'm the proud father of Sar, Eitan, and Aviv, married to Neta. I've been in the web development industry for over a decade in various roles, starting from QA to management to backend to frontend, and I love it all. And currently, I'm the front-end tech lead in an amazing startup called Evinced, which focuses in creating accessibility tools for developers to make their website more accessible. So this talk is a practical talk about the way we are working in Evinced. As a company that specializes in accessibility, we cannot afford that our own system will be inaccessible. So this is a talk about dogfooding, about using our own products and learning the process on the way. So in Evinced, we have tools for websites, for mobile applications. We have manual tools and automatic and semi-automated tools. So there is a full suite of tools for developers. And luckily, I'm on the end of the developing the tools, and also I'm a consumer of them. So it's very fun. So what is accessibility? If you're not familiar with the term or with the area, it's a very wide area. And the formal definition is not something that I'm going to get into. I'll give you an intuition. So accessibility or digital accessibility means that when you're building your service, your application, your website, or whatever, you need to make it accessible for all people. For example, if one of the users or one of the people, because users are people mostly, has a vision deficiency, has problem seeing, and users only can only hear, navigate through hearing or through voice. So you need to make sure that your website can work well with software that narrates the content of the site, meaning assistive technology. So you need to make sure that the order of the HTML corresponds with the order of the content. It may sound like very easy, but imagine a very dense news website with a lot of tooltips and menus and pop-ups and advertisements. And as someone who cannot see and only hears it in a certain order, you must build your website in a way that will make sense and will make sense to navigation. Let's take another example. This time, for someone who cannot use the mouse. So, for example, someone that has a motorical issue and cannot use the mouse and can navigate also only using the keyboard. So to do that, you need to make sure that all the buttons and all the links and all the elements that are interactable are accessible by keyboard. And surprisingly, it's not that easy. And most sites don't have 100% of support for keyboard. So this is our challenge. And our challenge is not to fix it once, but to fix it for all the time. So when we wanted to tackle the issue of accessibility, we asked ourselves the question of where should we start? Here are some of the options that were on the table. Well, we can start covering accessibility by flows, meaning we can make sure the login flow is accessible from start to finish, meaning make sure that the user can enter his user and password, and then he can click the sign up link and they click forgot his password, forgot my password, and then everything is accessible by keyboard and also using the screen reader, the software that narrates the content. And then cover another flow, the purchase flow, which starts with the product page, then add to cart, then maybe the place where you put your credit card details, and then another flow of the support. You get the idea. So cover it flow by flow. Another idea was let's cover it page by page. So let's make sure that all the elements inside the homepage are accessible. And then let's do the same for the contact us page. And then do the same for the payment page. But there's a third way, which comes more natural for us as developers, which is to think of a website as a composition of components. As modern web developers, this is the most natural way for us to think about websites. So our website may have some logic of contact, of payment, but at the end, it's built out of buttons, forms, drop-downs, pop-ups, pull-ups, many different interactions and components. What if we could make sure all of the components are accessible by themselves? It will make our lives easier in testing the entire application. So we gave it a thought. And we thought, well, we like flows. It's good. And also we like pages. It's also fine. But components we love because this is the way we are used to work. This is the way we are building our own code. We are thinking in components. So this is the recipe that works for us. Well, first we break down our system into small components. They can be dumb, they can be smart. It's a different discussion, but they should be small enough. Now, after that, we'll build them with the appropriate HTML tags, meaning we try to find the best HTML tag to suit the component. I'll get into it in a moment. And second, we're going to automate everything we can, including accessibility testing. Okay, so I want one moment to change the setup. So take a quick moment, take a sip of your coffee. And okay, and now we're back. Chaim, if you can please give me a thumbs up if the screen is shared.
The screen is shared. Looks fine.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's dive into the first part, which is break down into small components. Let's say I have an application called Hogwarts on Demand. It's an amazing site. I wish it was real. The idea is like that we're going to build a service that you can book a Harry Potter character, invite them into your house, into your daughter's party, into your son's bar mitzvah or whatever, and they come, they give you a visit, you pay them some money, and that's it. So you book them on demand. It's amazing. So this is our website. You can select the character, the location, the date. let's see what components are here. So here we have a drop-down component, for example, and there is also a date picker, where we can select the date and the hour, and there is a button. So this button may appear in other places in the website as well. And this is only like a small portion of the website because there is also the sign up form, the login form, the open dispute form, which is very popular in this imaginary website, at least in my imagination. So, okay, now we spotted the components. Now we want to move them into a different place and to have a place to hold all of these components. And we call this place our component library. So for us, what worked is that we started by identifying the common components, and then we created a new Git repository for them. We consume the components in our different products. We have 5 products that use the same component library because we have several products. And it contains of different size building blocks. I mean, the component could be a small one, like a button. It could be a more complex one, like a chart, graph, some data visualization tool, or a table with state management inside. I mean, it could be in very different sizes. And the most important part is that now we have all the components without the business logic, without the knowledge of our product per se, but only knowledge about the component and the UI behavior. Now we put our weight into creating both functional and accessibility testing. So this is the stacks we used. We used React and TypeScript to create the components. We used Storybook to to create stories for them, or to create a visual, it's like a visual representation of the component that is rendered without any wrapper. And we used Circle CI for testing, for deployment, and continuous integration, and Cypress for testing. So, like I said, first we identify the component, and now we want to create an accessible component. So let's think about a button. Let's make an accessible button. So if this was like a live talk this is a live talk, but if I could see you, I would ask you, what does it mean for a button to be accessible? So Chaim, if you want to take the part of the respected audience member, what do you think it takes for a button to be accessible?
Well, I think it is about the shape more than the color, because if you have someone who can't identify color, then the shape at least will tell him whether the button is pushed or not. Maybe.
Okay, so it's very interesting what you said, because you said, well, there is the visual aspect of the button, like how do you see it? So you need some kind of a good color contrast in the button, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is important, and it's true also for other places in your website. Like, for example, you need the text of the title to be in a good contrast. One thing that is specific for button or for accessible for other interactive elements is that it should be, for example, accessible. It should be focusable by keyboard, meaning that, and thank you, Chaim. So it means that that if you're using a keyboard and not using your mouse, you need a way to focus on that button. And after you focus on it, you need a way to give an indication that it's focusable, meaning you need a way to put like a line or a border surrounding it. And after you do that, you need to support the Enter key or the spacebar key. Depends on your operating system, so it will work, the functionality will work. And then you need to hint assistive technology such as screen reader that the element that you're standing on is a button. Okay, sounds easy. So let's get into it. So this is the basic start for a button. So this is a div. I gave it an ID of button 1, class button, and what actually makes it a button is the onClick. So I have an onClick, When you click on the button on the div, it alerts with an amazing hello. Believe me, it works. Now let's make it focusable by keyboard. We can do it by using the tab index attribute, which is an attribute used only for putting this element in the tabbing order of the browser. Now we want to make sure that the enter key works. To do that, we are adding an event listener, meaning that for now, if the user is focusing on the element, on the button, and uses the enter key, then it will perform the same functionality. And finally, we need to tell screen readers that this is a button. So we are adding a roll button to this element. So what you see now is the almost completed accessible code for an accessible button. But the problem is that this is code, and it's also not very good. I mean, the element ID here, it should be dynamic in a way. Should I consider it? And what if I have a different operating system? I mean, if like Mac supports also spacebar and Windows 11 supports enter, but it does things different. I mean, there is a lot of code here and we need to test it. What if I told you there's a different way? What if instead of doing all this code, we could just use the button tag? And it works. I mean, there is some magic inside the browser, which is that it follows the HTML convention. So HTML has some great tags inside it that also have accessibility baked into them. Meaning that if you as a developer, you are using the button element, it gives you all the things for free. It puts the button on the tab index. It supports key presses. It has a focus indication, not very pretty, but you can style it. And it also tells assistive technology that this is a button. So if they give us something for free, let's take it. And this is true not only for buttons. This is also true for headers, for H1, H2, etc. It's true also for select, for combo boxes, for input tags. That's why we put a special emphasis on using the correct semantic role of the tag. I mean, we try to think what is the most appropriate tag, HTML tag to use for every element on the site. And when we bake it into our component library, it makes the entire site more accessible. Now let's dive into the last part, which is automating the accessibility of the component testing. So let's create a button. This time I learned from my previous slide that I should use the button tag. So here's the button tag. And we have some properties. It could be a primary button or secondary button, and there is an on-click. And we can send the children. This is the React syntax, by the way, if you're not familiar with it. And it renders the button. Now we want to create a storybook for it. A storybook story. So this is the syntax of storybook. It means that we're creating now two stories, one called primary, one called secondary. And we are giving each one a different configuration. So the primary has the Boolean parameter of is primary to be set to true, and the secondary set to false. So we have two components isolated from the system, only rendered by themselves. And this is how it looks like on Storybook. Okay, so this is the primary button. This is the secondary button. Now this is pretty simple. We have only two components. Now we're going to use this as the basis for our tests. Meaning, so there is a small magic button here inside the Storybook UI, which makes us open the component without all of this wrapper, without the canvas docs, without the tooltip, the toolbar, without the menu on the small, the menu on the left, sorry for my English. And it opens a new tab without all this wrapper. So when I open it, it will be the base for our test, because now we can test the component in a completely isolated environment. So let's write some tests for it. So here's a test for primary and secondary button. So the first test, it says that the primary one should respond to click, and we visit our primary button, we click on it, and we validate the click works. And we do the same for the secondary button. So now when we run the test, we can easily see that the tests fail. The good tests are passing, which is amazing. Green is a great color. I love green, especially in testing. Now let's add accessibility testing to the mix. So what should the automated accessibility test find? Here are some of the things that I would expect it to find. So if, for example, I have an image, but I didn't give it any alternative text, I would expect the test to fail and to say, hey, Asaf, you need to add an alternative text to the image, because someone who cannot see very well would have no idea what does this image mean. Maybe it's very important. Or that, like we said before, I wanted to say that the button is not focusable by keyboard. Or I want to say that there is a pop-up, but the pop-up is not accessible. For example, the pop-up, I cannot close the pop-up using the keyboard, because I cannot close it with the escape key, and I cannot close it using a small X icon, because the X icon is not accessible by keyboard. So it's very complex. There are very interesting scenarios to test. And as a developer, I don't think about all of them. I want the accessibility tool, the accessibility testing library, to think about it for me. Another example is the example that Chaim spoke about. I wanted to tell me that the color contrast is insufficient. So this is the test structure. But first, this magical testing library is, luckily for me, I work in a company that creates products for developers to help them create more accessible websites. And one of these tools is this testing library, or testing SDK. So I used the library of our own accessibility engines bundled into Cypress, and that they are testing all of these things and more. And now I'm going to show how I integrated it. So first, I visit the URL, then I call a command called ev-start, meaning start the engine, start gathering accessibility issues, record everything that you see, everything that changes, just gather accessibility issues. I will validate them later, and then I do stuff. I click on element, open the pop-up, select 2 options, 3 options, clear all, do whatever I want to make sure functionality-wise the component work. And then I call ev-stop, meaning stop the recording, and I want to validate that there are no accessibility issues. This is how it looks in real code. I take the text from before. The first line is ev-start, then I perform the functional test. I visit the website, and then I perform a click. And at the end, I call ev-stop and expect that no accessibility issues would be found. And if I run this one, I get red. And I don't like red, because red makes me sad. And this is not a rhyme I planned of saying, and I'm very ashamed now. So now I have a failing test. So let's look at the report and see what made it fail. So as you can see from here, you can see the small picture, the small screenshot here, the secondary button, and it says in the title, color contrast. So there's a problem with the color contrast. So let's dive into it. We can see that the current colors are RGBA 104, 100, 100, 06, 09, and white, which is not a very good mix. And because I'm the only one here in the room, I'm now qualifying myself as a UI lead. and I decide to fix it by changing this color to black, which I don't know a lot about colors, but black and white seemed like a good mix for contrast. Now let's run the test again. And now it works. Great. Okay, so now we have some accessibility tests for the button. So how does it work in our pipeline? So we build our code, we create a new component or change an existing one. Then we push it to our CI machines using Circus CI, and we run storybooks, run accessibility testing, run functional tests. And if everything goes well, we have a new version of our common components library. We deploy it, and then we can consume it in different projects. So what we spoke about here is about one component, and this is how it looks like in real life. So what you can see here is our storybook component library. It has more than 40 components with more than 170 stories and tests. We are a team of 7 developers working on them in parallel, and the tests are not only saving our components from refactors and redesigns, they're also saving us from breaking each other's code, because maybe someone develops a component, but now a different person is contributing to it, and it doesn't remember all the accessibility aspects of that component. So when the accessibility testing are automated, it gives us a lot of confidence in our code. And so we have simple components like buttons, and we have complex ones like select boxes, like charts, like tables. And it's very fun. So here are the takeaways. What I want you to take from this talk. First, if you want to do the same like we did, the first step is divide and conquer. Divide your application into small components. See what components are common between different projects, or if you have only one project, you can do it in the same repository, but put it outside of a specific business logic. Second, be friends with HTML. Use the correct HTML tag. If you can take only one thing for this talk, use the button tag. Don't take a div and force it into something else. And third, automate. Automate whatever you can. Automate the CI pipeline, automate the functional tests, and automate the accessibility testing. Lastly, accessibility can be very challenging and it sounds intimidating. But the good thing is that we as developers, we have the place in the organization to influence on the things one step at a time. We can take one component and make it accessible, and we can start the movement and start raising awareness about accessibility for our entire team and for product personnel and for UI designers, because it's about communication. If you want to build a really accessible product, it needs to be accessible in all levels of decision makers and designers and stakeholders. So it can be your own quest. You can take it one component at a time. So as I said, I'm Asaf. I'm working at Evinced, and it was a pleasure talking here today. You're welcome to chat with me here in the Q&A, in the LinkedIn, or to visit my refurnished website at programmer.net. And if you're interested in more accessibility content, we have a great blog and knowledge base in Evinced. So we'd like to thank you for your time. And if you hesitate, remember that accessibility is much more accessible than you think. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Asaf. Thank you for your contribution. On the personal level, I can share that the accessibility requirements here in Israel are quite difficult for developers to comply with. The requirements are very tough comparing with other countries. So maybe the direction you take might be helpful for developers do their job, because as of today, and you're probably familiar with the accessibility law, it is very difficult to understand the requirements and to comply with the requirements, and there is the law on one end and there is the reality on the other end. So hopefully it's something that will happen one day.
I surely hope so. I think there's a huge opportunity here. We can speak about, we didn't speak, it was a talk about developing for accessibility, but we didn't discuss accessibility, like the reason. We didn't discuss the motivation or anything like it, but there could be several, there is also the economical motivation. We're speaking about almost 20% of the people that have some kind of disability. So even if you're a huge organization, it can be a huge opportunity if your company would be accessible and versus your competitor. People will go to your website.
Yeah, indeed. It's a huge topic. We have just you have just touched it from your perspective, from what you do on your company.
Yeah.